So I'm going to get ready to introduce our next keynote presenter, which is Michael Ioffe, who was recently featured in Forbes' 30 Under 30. And a little bit more about Michael before I hand you the microphone, the virtual mic. Michael is the son of Jewish refugees from Latvia and Ukraine, giving him a strong appreciation and passion for education at a very young age. At age 15, Michael founded Tile.org, one of the world's largest entrepreneurship education nonprofits. Through Tile.org's work in Yemen, where the civil war was forcing schools to close, he got the idea to deliver short-form courses via text message. In 2019, he launched Boston-based Arist, a platform that now helps organizations ranging from GE to the state of California rapidly teach and train their employees via text message-based courses, which are remarkably accessible and effective. So without further ado, Michael, I'm going to hand you the virtual mic and have you take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. And thrilled to be here as well. Give me just one moment. I'm going to share my screen. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Awesome. Perfect. All right. Thanks again, everybody, for coming today. My name is Michael. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Arist. And today we're going to talk about the learning modalities of the future, which is a topic that I'm super excited about. And I hope you all will be excited about as well after our chat. So I'm going to start by sharing a little bit about why I'm here. And then I'll start explaining a bit about why this shift in learning modalities is happening. And we'll wrap up with a few best practices for both experimenting with and introducing new learning modalities in your organization. So some quick background. I help run Arist. We're an organization that helps some of the world's leading companies and organizations deliver learning and training via tools like text message, WhatsApp, Slack, and Teams. And I want to start today with a quick story. So a few years ago, as Shalene briefly mentioned, I was working with students in the Yemeni conflict zone through a nonprofit that I was running when I met a student named Muhammad Al-Adlani. Now, Muhammad Al-Adlani was running one of our locations in Yemen. And to our surprise, out of our 450 locations globally, we were running free live entrepreneurship education events. Our location in Yemen was by far and away the most successful. Our typical event would have anywhere from 50 to 100 attendees. Our events in Yemen regularly had 200 to 300 attendees packed into a small room willing to learn. And so I became obsessed with the situation in Yemen and started trying to understand why the learning that we were delivering was so impactful in Yemen, and why students weren't able to access learning content there. And what Muhammad explained to me was that Yemen's educational system had been defunct for over 4 years at this point, largely because of the civil conflict. And so students were desperate for educational resources, but there were a number of limitations in place. And these were the primary limitations, right? As an organization, we were trying to figure out how could we deliver more educational content to students in Yemen, because many of the students that Muhammad was working with wanted to learn more about entrepreneurship, but we were limited by 3 learning modalities, right? First off, as a group of American nonprofit leaders, we couldn't travel to Yemen, right? We couldn't send money to Yemen. We couldn't send textbooks to Yemen. And digitally, our only 3 options were to create a video course, a series of e-learning modules, or again, deliver in-person live training. And unfortunately, none of these were possible. After putting together, somewhat naively, a series of video-based courses and sending them to Muhammad, Muhammad let me know that only 24% of the students in Yemen had access to the internet. So these video-based courses that I'd started putting together were completely inaccessible and completely irrelevant to the students that Muhammad was working with. So I started brainstorming ways to deliver more educational content in Yemen in a way that would be far more accessible. And after banging my head against the wall for a few months, trying to figure out how to deliver educational content in a place where delivering content was so difficult, right, because of all of these limitations, I started realizing that everybody in Yemen had access to a phone, or almost everybody had access to a phone. Of Muhammad's peers, pretty much everybody had access to texting or WhatsApp. And even Muhammad and I, our primary method of communication was by Facebook Messenger. And so I started realizing that if we could figure out a way to deliver educational content via text or via messages, we could make learning far more accessible to the students that Muhammad and I were working with. So we ended up creating a text-based course specifically designed to teach entrepreneurship to students in Yemen. And we were very, very skeptical about whether or not you could actually teach something via text, but we decided to, try it out. To our surprise, our first text-based course was incredibly successful. We focused on teaching one concept or case study at a time, and spaced it out over a few days. And to our surprise, people absolutely loved learning by text. In Yemen, we had completion and satisfaction rates of over 90%. And then when we ended up piloting that same course with learners in the United States, what we found is that over 70% of learners preferred learning via text to learning via video. And we couldn't really understand why, right? To us, we felt that text was, a little bit more limited than video, and we couldn't go sort of as depth initially as we wanted to. Later, we figured out ways to make, learning via text pretty in depth. But we were just so surprised by how different the completion and satisfaction and adoption rates were that we decided to investigate further. And what we started realizing upon further investigation was that access to learning wasn't the only challenge with current learning modalities, right? What people said over and over and over again in our research was that people loved learning via text, not because of the content, but because of the modality, right? The content was pretty much the same as content that they could have anywhere else, right? This was a pretty basic entrepreneurship course. But the thing is for them, they loved the fact that this learning modality gave them the level of flexibility to learn on their own time and learn where they were. And so we decided to do a deep dive and try to get a better understanding of what were the current learning modalities that were available and how could we make better learning modalities from scratch. So there's a few major challenges with current learning modalities, and I'll bucket, in-person training, video-based training, live training. I'll bucket all of those into sort of current learning modalities. Video is overwhelmingly the most popular learning modality currently, and there's a few major challenges with it, right? First off, it's very, very tough to measure impact and outcomes. Most video-based courses or e-learning modules are one-time experiences, which means that it's tough to measure impact and outcomes over a longer period of time, which is often when action and behavior change happens. At the same time, as we learned with our experience in Yemen, video-based courses are often inaccessible or just simply not possible for busy or deskless employees, right? But what we've been hearing from our clients especially is that learners are having a harder and harder time fitting in 1 or 2 hours into their schedule to learn. And that's especially true for employees who may be deskless or who may not have access to a laptop or internet regularly. What we've also learned is that with existing learning modalities, courses can be very, very expensive to build. I was incredibly surprised to learn that a typical e-learning course will cost sometimes $5,000 to $40,000 to build. Even though the content is often content that's repurposed from existing, modalities or existing courses, and oftentimes these courses are not terribly complex. At the same time, one of the things that we've learned is that there's limited opportunities for reinforcement. And one of the things that we've learned over and over again as we've spoken to learning leaders is that reinforcement and the ability to extend learning over a large period of time is a consistent challenge with the video-based courses and existing e-learning modules. And this is probably the biggest challenge with e-learning currently and with existing learning modalities, right? Currently, if your learning sits on a learning management system or if your learning sits on a third-party platform, people have to go to the learning, right? And that creates an implicit level of friction and a meaningful barrier to learners being able to adapt to learning and engage with it on a regular basis, right? That's one of the biggest reasons why massive online open courses, right? Platforms like Coursera or Udemy have such low completion rates. Not because the content is bad, but because oftentimes learners have to take a lot of steps to go to take a course on Udemy or Coursera. A study that we did, sort of internally, found that to access your learning content in a platform like Coursera, you have to click 12 times to get to where you need to go. And the thing is we believe that the learning modalities of the future should bring learning to the people, right? Should meet people where they are. And by bringing learning to the people, we can make learning far more accessible. So, that's also bolstered by the fact that there's this huge gap, and this is some research done by Go1. There's this huge gap between the percentage of learners who say they know they need to learn and want to learn, and the percentage of learners who say that they don't have time to learn at work, right? What we're noticing is that learners want to learn, right? The desire is there, but oftentimes people are so busy and so overwhelmed that both finding the time to learn and finding the time to go to a separate platform to learn creates an insurmountable barrier to accessing learning, especially when we're talking about upskilling and reskilling, right? Where behavior change and action needs to happen over a longer period of time. So with that in mind, we decided to dive into the research and figure out what would a better learning modality look like. And there's a few things we wanted to keep in mind. First off was space learning, right? Many of you might be familiar with this research from Harvard, but essentially space learning is a concept of delivering learning spaced out in bite-sized chunks over a longer period of time. The research from Harvard indicates that by delivering learning in a spaced method, we can actually dramatically increase knowledge retention rates over time. Many of you all may be less familiar with space behavior change, and this is one of my favorite studies. Dr. Susanna Loeb is a pioneer in behavior change by text and space behavior change. And essentially the same principles that make space learning very, very effective also make space behavior change effective, right? You can, if you send behavioral nudges every single day over a longer period of time, you can actually very meaningfully shift behavior in a positive way. And another thing that we wanted to consider was the intention action gap. Right. This is some research that UPenn recently released about bridging the intention action gap and getting people to take their vaccines. And what they found was the simple action of texting people and meeting people where they are in a way that was comfortable, in a way that was very friendly and conversational, helped to bridge the intention action gap between people who wanted to take their vaccines, people who wouldn't, but people who hadn't yet taken the actions necessary to get their vaccine training. And the last thing that we wanted to consider, this was research that was very, very compelling to us, was the concept of meeting people where they are, right? 95% of learners open a text within 3 minutes, and texting is the most commonly used medium, the most commonly used and most widely available communications medium currently in existence. At the same time, on services like email or Slack or Microsoft Teams, on Slack alone, people spend more than 9 hours a day connected to the service, which means that, if learners are only spending 10 or 30 minutes a day in their LMS and 9 hours a day on Slack, delivering content on Slack, for example, has a much higher chance of getting recognized and completed. So with all that in mind, the research told us that learning modalities are most effective when they're accessible, support concise and bite-sized learning, are space learning friendly, right? So that they can natively and easily support spacing out learning over time, are completely frictionless and embedded with completely frictionless in terms of their ability to access content, and are also hyper engaging, right? And again, when you think of engagement, text-based mediums like Slack and email and Teams are very, very, very engaging. We interact with them all the time. And so with that in mind, we realized that learning should happen on the mediums that we use on a day-to-day basis in a structured way. And I'll get into what that structure looks like in a second. But if we're already using tools like WhatsApp and SMS and Teams and Slack on a day-to-day basis, we might as well use them for learning. And if we can find a way to use them for learning in a really effective and accessible way, that can create transformational impact. So with that in mind, we ended up creating a text message-based course model. Innovating on sort of the initial text-based course that we had deployed to students in Yemen, we took all of this research and condensed it into a model that would teach one concept or case study at a time. We included emojis and GIFs to make things as engaging as possible, because one of the things that we've learned is that keeping things conversational is critical. And we included interactive multiple choice questions, assessments, and responses that could be answered entirely in text. And the benefit of that is that learners never have to leave their texting experience to learn. What we started realizing at a higher level is that, powerful learning moments that can be seamlessly embedded into existing platforms is sort of the goal, right, of learning modalities of the future. And we believe that in the future, the best learning approach is one focused on meeting people where they are, wherever they are, right? If a frontline employee is using text on a day-to-day basis, then we can meet them there. Right? If a manager is using Teams on a day-to-day basis, then we can meet them there and deliver learning truly in the flow of work on the tools that we use on a day-to-day basis. So there's a few reasons why using existing modalities like Slack, Teams, and text for learning, there's a few reasons why that's so powerful, right? First off, you have much higher adoption and accessibility, right? For a tool like Microsoft Teams, where many organizations have over 90% saturation and adoption rates for a tool like Teams, you don't need to introduce any new learning tools, right? People are already using Teams and Slack, or already using email and text. And so you can seamlessly embed learning into the tools that they already use, and that increases adoption rates dramatically. As well, learning all of a sudden becomes incredibly accessible, because even if a learner doesn't have access to the internet or doesn't have access to a laptop, they can still receive learning on their phone, even if they just have a flip phone that isn't app enabled. At the same time, existing modalities like Slack, Teams, and text have native support for space reinforcement, right? It is much, much easier to send, a message every single day over the course of a few weeks on a tool like Teams versus sending a message by email every single day that links to video in your LMS, right? That there's a number of steps in one situation and 0 steps in another situation. The other benefit is that when delivering courses via text-based modalities, courses can be built very, very quickly. We've seen organizations build and launch text-based courses in a day. if not less. I think the current record is about 30 minutes for building and launching a text-based course experience. And because we interact with learners on a day-by-day and concept-by-concept basis, and because we can ask up to 6 questions per day, we actually get incredibly detailed data about learner comprehension on a day-by-day and course-by-course and question-by-question level. And so the benefit of using existing modalities is that because learners are comfortable with responding much more often, we just get much better data about how learners are doing over a longer period of time. So let's take a look at what this looks like in practice, right? The idea of learning existing modalities like text, Slack, and Teams for learning is cool and all, but let's see what it actually looks like in practice. So one of my favorite examples is an organization called GLISI, which is a leadership training institute based in Georgia. And GLISI is responsible in large part for delivering leadership training to thousands and thousands of employees, primarily principals and teachers stationed across the state. They had a challenge with one specific school district where DEI course completion rates were incredibly low. People were simply not doing their DEI training, and this was critical in a time where DEI training was becoming just absolutely necessary. And so GLISI decided to deliver a text-based course. In addition to their traditional e-learning modules, they decided to offer a text-based course to employees because they started realizing that employees just simply didn't have time to complete or engage with their DEI training. And what they found was that over 80% of learners opted for a text-based course, and they were immediately able to 5x their adoption rates by meeting learners where they were. And most importantly, learners saw incredibly high rates of self-reported behavior change. People felt that for the first time, their behavior was actually shifting, that this course was making a difference, largely because the course was deployed over a period of 4 months, just 2 texts a week, and learners had the chance to reflect on every single concept and case study that they were learning about. Another one of my favorite examples is DuPont Sustainable Solutions. And when COVID hit, they had a need to deliver safety and COVID-19 training to managers and employees globally. Their challenge was that their employee base was highly distributed and had a variety of different accessibility needs. Some employees, didn't have access to a laptop, and some employees were in the office all the time. And they need to reach learners on any device in any setting with a variety of different courses for different user groups. And by delivering courses via text and WhatsApp, they were able to meet all the learners where they were while also deploying training very, very quickly. And then my final favorite case study is the state of California. The state of California delivered disaster preparedness training statewide using text-based courses. And for them, their biggest challenge was that a major portion of the state that they were trying to reach, particularly farmers in the Central Valley, didn't have access to laptops and had very, very spotty internet access. And the in-person sessions that the state of California was hosting for these learners simply were not possible post-COVID, and we're also getting low adoption rates as well. And so using tools like WhatsApp, which were commonly used by the population that they were trying to serve, the state of California saw 90% satisfaction rates, and most importantly, a 93% increase in confidence improvements amongst learners. So learners felt much more confident and were actually coached on taking action to prepare for a disaster every single day over the course of 7 days. So with that in mind, let's look at how new modalities like text message, Slack, and Teams can help us build better courses. So first off, we believe that these modalities can create a transformation in course development, right? Courses can be built much more quickly, and they can be built much more quickly from scratch as well. Anybody can contribute to creating text-based courses, and courses can be very, very quickly updated as well. Most importantly, upskilling can happen gradually over time, and learners don't have to take time out of their day to be upskilled in a gradual and meaningful way. And courses can also be rapidly copied and customized because instead of re-recording a whole video, all you have to do is retype some text. We also have a few best practices for how to start using and experimenting with new learning modalities. New learning modalities like text message, Slack, and Teams are good for certain things and not good for certain things. And we find that they're particularly well suited for large scale or distributed trainings, action and retention oriented trainings, and behavior change oriented trainings where your goal is to shift behavior over time. We've also seen these new learning modalities be used very, very well as a reinforcement or supplementation tool. We've noticed as many of our clients will start by using modalities like Slack or Teams to reinforce learning, and then we'll eventually deliver standalone courses on them over time. We also have a few recommendations for when to be cautious about using new modalities. So we found that for now, given the existing technologies that exist, text-based courses and Slack and Teams-based courses are not particularly well suited for highly technical training or highly collaborative learning experiences. The caveat to this is when organizations use Microsoft Teams or Slack or Text to drive learners into more in-depth learning experiences on other platforms and use them as an engagement tool, right, or adoption tool. For now, because AI tools are so limited, we also don't recommend using text-based modalities for highly personalized learning journeys. We think this will change over the course of the next few months as AI has become more powerful and as highly personalized learning journeys can be built in a much more seamless way. But for now, we found that text-based courses are very, very good for training at scale. We have also seen that in-depth one-on-one learning and in-depth one-on-one coaching is oftentimes not the best fit for text-based modalities, unless that text-based experience is happening on a one-to-one level. Right, what we've seen is that automated coaching at scale has worked in some cases, but needs to be done in a very, very careful and considerate manner. And we want to wrap up here with a few best practices as you think about exploring new modalities like text-based modalities, Slack, Teams, Text, etc., in your organization. Right. First off, don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to take some of your existing courses, convert them into text-based format, and give learners an alternative modality to experiment with. Also, don't forget to continuously get user feedback in session, right? One of the great things about having this line of engagement and line of communication with your employees and with your learners is that you can constantly get user feedback. At the same time, be as concise and succinct as possible, right? One of the things about delivering learning in the flow of work is it needs to be in the flow of work. That means that learning engagements shouldn't be longer than 5 to 10 minutes. And most importantly, be as conversational and engaging as possible. Right, being conversational and engaging, the same way that a text would feel like it's coming from a friend, you want messages to feel like they're coming from a colleague, and that's one of the things that makes learning very, very successful when delivered in these new learning modalities. Awesome. So to wrap up, before we jump into questions, we believe that the learning modalities of the future can be the modalities that we already use on a day-to-day basis. Modalities like email, Slack, Text, Teams, etc. And we believe that meeting people where they are can lead to much higher adoption, completion, and satisfaction rates. And the data, there's also data to validate that. Dozens of teams are already using these tools for learning in the flow of life and learning in the flow of work. And we encourage you all to experiment with them as well as we explore the learning modalities of the future. So thanks so much. And I'd love to answer a few of these questions. So, and one important thing before I jump into that. Just to bring this story full circle, Mohammed ended up receiving a full scholarship to the American University in Beirut, and he now works in the nonprofit sector. And without Mohammed, none of this would have happened. So with that in mind, I'd love to answer a few audience questions. So Sumer asks, how do you track training attendance or see training in a learning transcript when using Text or Teams? Yeah, so the great thing is that on tools like Slack, Text, or Teams, we can see every single day if a learner has responded to the message. We generally recommend including a series of assessment questions or open-ended reflection questions in every single module. Pardon. And so that way, every single day we can see whether or not, pardon, grab a drink of water. There we go. Essentially, every single day we can see whether or not learners have engaged with that concept or case study and whether they've completed it. And so that means that we can very accurately gather completion rates, engagement rates, attendance rates, etc. And again, you can see because learners just text back their answers and all of their answers can be tracked in an LMS or tracked in a third-party system, we can actually, using Arist, for example, see all of the user responses and see how learners are doing in each of their course experiences. So Justin asked a great question about, is there capacity for diversified learning? For example, if a student shows they do not fully understand a concept, is there an option to revisit additional content for that student before moving on? Yes, without a doubt. We've seen, especially now as we've seen organizations adding an adaptive learning into these existing modalities, and that's actually a tool that we have already in Arist to a degree that we're rolling out more in depth over the course of the next few weeks. Our goal eventually is that text-based courses are fully AI enabled so we can ensure that learners are understanding every concept in case study and that we can move courses along as needed thereafter. Beth asked a great question about privacy and security concerns for sending text messages to personal devices. So a few things to keep in mind, a platform like Arist is fully GDPR and CCPA compliant. And because we have a secure opt-in process for getting personal devices and personal phone numbers. And because we automatically encrypt all user phone numbers, we actually are one of the most secure platforms to deliver learning and training on. One of the things to keep in mind is that sending text messages to personal devices and delivering learning content that way is not too dissimilar from delivering course content by email or by video, right? All of the content can be captured and recorded on any of those devices. But it's much, much harder to fully record a text message course than it is to record a video. And we have a number of procedures in place to ensure that content is secure, but also that user phone number data is fully secure. And happy to jump into that. We have a trust center that goes a lot more in depth into that as well.